Rejoice, my friends, because if you are an exile, well, there's a place for you to go after all, because Path of Exile 2 is here. Today I'm going to be giving you my Path of Exile 2 early review, Path of Exile 2 game review, looking at the early access stuff, what I've played so far from the event at Tokyo Game Show, go into all of the gameplay mechanics, what's changed, what's been revealed, and all of that good stuff. It's important to give you an early look at big games coming out because, one, we can't really trust the developers as much as we used to, even though that this studio is looking actually very transparent and very trustworthy, which is very refreshing, and I want to see more of that from developers. You know, they laid it all out. They're serious about giving content to this game in early access. That's what we need to see more of, but still, we can never be sure because the gaming industry is constantly changing. And of course, second of all, the industry, just as it is right now, access journalism, IGN being massive shills, and a lot of big YouTubers also just being shills, just profiting off of the correct thing to say. Now, I'm going to give you an objective and rational take on this game. I usually tell you my biases, if I like a genre or not. Now, this type of RPG, I'm not actually a huge fan of, but I've grown to actually love it. Just like I grew to love other types of RPGs, like I did with Baldur's Gate. I think Path of Exile is truly something special. I've gone back to play the first one so I could appreciate the second one more, and from my time with playing Path of Exile 2, I was confused to begin with, especially as it was all in Japanese, which did not help at the event, but still, I enjoyed my time with it. So let's jump into this Path of Exile 2 Early Access review. So, what is Path of Exile and why is the endgame always talked about? Why is it such a big deal? Well, basically, the endgame is absolutely nuts, okay? I haven't seen an endgame like this in any other game before. The amount of replayability that it offers you is pretty just staggering, to be honest. So if you want a game that has a big vision and a goal to reach, you know, and then tons and tons of content, then Path of Exile 2 is definitely for you because there's tons of content, but you have to grind to get there. Some people love the grind, some people not so much. And in early access, what we're getting is, you know, Act 1 to 3, and that's all gonna come. 25 hours it takes probably to complete, 8 hours if you're, you know, an Exile master. But, you know, a lot of content here. We've got 2 difficulty modes for standard campaign and then basically New Game Plus, which is pretty cool and crazy that they've even got that, which is cruel difficulty, which means it's going to be a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging. And then the endgame content where you have 8 different endgame modes, but they're all so different, and the amount of modifiers that you can place on each like new biome and map. Waystones, wow, that's out there. It's way out there. God damn it. Someone shoot me, please. So yes, it's insane stuff, to be honest, and if you're a fan of ARPGs, then you'll definitely like it. If you're more of a traditional RPG person, you know, you like turn-based combat, then I think you'll actually enjoy this as well. You know, coming from something like Baldur's Gate 3, it's basically that type of combat system, but in real time, okay? It's tactical, just like that game is, but more of a kind of horde shooter, more of a bullet hell to some degree. When that does happen, when all of these traps are going off and you've got to avoid everything, all of these different modifiers, especially the end game. I haven't seen that, I haven't played it myself, but just from what I've played so far, it already feels like that. And they've added classes to Path of Exile 2, yes, that's right, that basically make it into a shooter, a top-down shooter, which is pretty insane, and actually that's the class I chose and played as, just because it was new and I thought it was interesting, but I was kind of disappointed. I was like, huh, what is this? When I first ever played it, like, it's a top-down shooter, but actually I didn't realize I chose that new class, but still, it was a lot of fun. There's also a big surprise for people who are Path of Exile fans at the end of the video, something that you do not know about this game, and honestly I've never seen anyone else say anything about it. Wow, that's some high-quality watch time right there. Make sure you watch until the end of the video, otherwise Mr. Beast will break down your house, kick in your door, and he will shove Feastables down your goddamn throat for not watching until the end of the video. Thanks, Mr. Beast, for that retention.
Feastables, yeah!
But honestly, I do just want to say before I get into this review of Path of Exile 2, please do subscribe to the channel. Just consider it, and if you do subscribe, just, I just want you to know you mean absolutely everything to me. I'm so passionate about this community. I don't want to get all parasocial or anything, but I'm so passionate about building a proper OG YouTube community. I'm not trying to, be some kind of friendly little brand or something. I just want to do this to have a connection with you guys so we can actually talk about the passion of video games, the creativity of them. If you love gaming reviews, early access content, and philosophical videos, that's also very important. I blend all of them together. So just join this community, subscribe. It only takes you 2 seconds. It does mean a lot to me. And yeah, I just want to hear what your opinions are in the comments about this. So sound off, please, and give the video a like, as that does help boost the video. And there's so many different weapon types that you can just play around with. And I'll talk about that more as I get into the classes. But honestly, it's just so cool because you aren't fixed into one playstyle. You can basically branch out and be whatever the hell you want. And basically, just from one weapon type, you can have all of these different skill gems that allow different abilities, like Armor Breaker, Stampede, Leap Slam, Earthquake, and so much more, and that's just for one weapon type. So there's so much to actually delve into. The combat itself might be repetitive, but they've got so many different enemies that it never actually feels repetitive, even though basically what you're doing most of the time is action. There's not really anything to break that up like you would get in other RPGs, like more narrative aspects or choice and consequences, interacting with other, NPCs. It's not really that type of RPG. It's much more of an action, looter-focused experience. But for people who are loot goblins, you're gonna love this, okay? But it never feels dull because there is 450 enemy types, and that's just with the early access stuff. So now let's break down the positives and negatives of this Path of Exile 2 review, this Path of Exile 2 early access review. Bear in mind, it is only early access, and it's only from what I've actually played myself. I haven't touched the endgame stuff, but I have done extensive research into that, as they were kind enough to provide a lot of outlets with more information and all that stuff. So the new mercenary class that I played as is so cool because basically it makes it into a top-down shooter, and eventually you can have these massive AoE attacks that's just going to blast people, all of the different monster types away, and you can even have basically a rapid-fire machine gun. So the first positive is just that, okay, the action in this game. It's tense, it's tactical, and it's difficult. If you're a Souls lover, even though this is a very different type of combat experience, you will still love the challenge. This game can be brutally difficult, and it doesn't hold your hand. If you mess up, that's it, okay? You don't get a second chance, especially in the end game, where once a world is done and you failed, you can't really go back to it, which is super cool and very refreshing to have something, just wall off content, because there's so much content as it is. So the combat is tense, it's tactical, you have to think about where you are, you constantly need to be on the move, you need to be, aware of traps and all that kind of stuff. The enemy types, you always have to think of what is the best approach. Yes, you can pretty much kill them with anything, but you have to think about how to use your arsenal the best. What weapon type is better for what enemy, what type of, buff and debuffs you have and all that stuff, the abilities. So you do have to think a lot, but there's so much always happening constantly. It's not like you're fighting one enemy at a time. It's very much you're basically battling an army, so you do really have to kind of think on your feet, and it's a lot of frantic gameplay, but I love it, and I think a lot of people will enjoy that, even if you're new to the series. That's the meat and potatoes of this game, is just the combat. The next positive is the build variation, okay? Like I kind of touched upon, the build variation in this game is completely nutty. Basically, you can have access to whatever the hell you want. You can try out all of these different weapon types, you can customize and branch out in many different ways, and at some point you can ascend, okay? And the Ascension class basically adds even more flavor to your current playstyle. So you can really create unique characters that, are completely different from one another, and that's going to be a lot of fun just to experiment with that. That's what keeps the combat feeling fresh, and I think that's going to carry this game even outside of early access. But for now, this is just a Path of Exile 2 early access review, but I do think it's going to carry the game forward, and they truly are making this a sequel for the fans of the first one, and it might not be very welcoming to new people, but not every game needs to be for everyone. But if you want to try it out, it is still accessible, and I think that this is just a superior game, and they're just adding tons of content. So that's a big positive. So now let's get into the next big positive, which is the classes, okay? So there are 6 different classes across Path of Exile 2, and yeah, there might be more later down the line, I don't know. But unlike something like Baldur's Gate 3, you don't need to multi-class, which I think is so cool. I love BSG, I love Baldur's Gate 3, I love that game, but honestly, the fact that you do have to multi-class, it doesn't really allow you as much freedom in one run, okay? This game, because it's not really that type of RPG where it's story-based, it's action-focused, it just lets you go off the wall and be a madman and experiment with all types of different playstyles, which I really like. You're not defined into a simple class. You can experiment with pretty much any weapon type and lots of different abilities, skill trees, progression, and especially the passive skill tree, which looks like a goddamn, it's certainly scary stuff, okay? The passive skill tree is certainly stuff of nightmares, okay? And I'll talk about that more in a bit. The next point I want to get into is the bosses, okay? There are so many bosses in this game. This is just a boss gauntlet to a degree. I mean, you'll be fighting lots of different bosses. It's not all bosses, but if you love looter games, looter-based, exploration dungeon crawlers like this, big action-focused experiences, and you just love grinding for loot, they don't feel copy and pasted, which is nice. They all do feel quite different from what I've actually seen so far, but I hope that, variation continues. And just the amount of variation in each map, in each, biome, like I said, it changes even more in the end game when you can add modifications to it. But there's always something going on. You always have to be aware of your surroundings. There's no real breathing room. And the bosses are super cool, just like the way they're designed. And it's not traditional boss battle design because this is a top-down, isometric RPG. So there's a lot of management, with your movement as well, like big AoE attacks, like I said, kind of like a bullet hell. The next positive is they've changed the system from Path of Exile 1, and I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert for you massive diehard Path of Exile fans. Please don't, eat me alive, okay? Do subscribe if you're new, because, I'm trying to learn. I'm not admitting I'm not an expert, but still, from what I've gathered, the rune system has been completely overhauled and changed, and that adds a lot of variation to the gameplay as well in Path of Exile 2. Although the passive skill tree looks incredible, and it's very impressive that it's just so giant that I've never seen anything like that in any other RPG, I do think they went a little bit overboard, because a lot of the stats, a lot of the bonuses that you get are just very tiny percentage increases. I would have liked to see a more refined version where it really changes your gameplay and adds new gameplay mechanics, new animations, new abilities, stuff like that. I know the point of it is being a passive skill tree, so it's in the background, but still, it's just a little bit overwhelming, and I think that will put a lot of people off, that they're never going to feel like they're going to grind this game. To reach that level, of course, die-hard fans are going to love it. The next positive I want to highlight is just the art style, okay? I'm a big fan of gritty fantasy, dark fantasy. I like high fantasy as well, but I think I do love dark fantasy a little bit more because I'm a massive Dark Souls fan. I just love anything that is, gritty and mature and gothic and, full of kind of demon spawn stuff. And yeah, this has plenty of that. I love the fact that they went for a gritty art style, not just focusing on graphical fidelity. It's got a very unique art style to it. That's how they could add so much content to this game instead of just focusing on shiny graphics. And it runs well, it performs well. I didn't have any issues when I play tested it. But yeah, just the art style is very cool. Sometimes with some of the weapons or some of the casting and stuff like that, you don't always feel the impact of your weapons like you would in a traditional type of RPG, third person or something like that. That's just my preference, so, take that with a grain of salt, but sometimes, yeah, it doesn't feel as impactful, but still it feels pretty cool, and just the look of the game is very cool. And the next negative, which I think is going to annoy some, because it's not really a negative, it's more of a nitpick, and it's only going to apply to some players, because this game does have a lot of variation in it, like so much, especially with the end game content, but I'm talking about the foundation of the game. Of course, you could say that about any game, but I do think some people might find this repetitive, or they might enjoy it for a while, but bounce off it. If you're a massive Path of Exile fan, of course, you're not gonna feel that way, but for some people, you might find that basically just rinse and repeating, kind of killing bosses, killing hordes of enemy, no matter if there is variation there, it might just get old for you. So just be warned, that is, what this game is. It doesn't have that much big difference in gameplay, actual core gameplay mechanics, okay? Another positive is just modding your weapons. Modifying your weapons is another thing that you can do. There's so many layers that just, makes this game fun, because it's just about the customization of your character. Some people might not like the rarity system of loot, but honestly, so far from what I've seen, it's balanced quite well. I haven't really seen any problems with it. There's even game modes at the end game content where you have to go through like 4 floors of absolute madness. And one thing that I will say is this game is not for the faint-hearted, okay? If you don't like difficult games, if you don't like a challenge, or if you're just new to this type of RPG, then I would say, maybe try a tamer game to begin with and then hop into Path of Exile. Honestly, this is the most rewarding type of ARPG that I've played, and it's definitely converted me into a lover of this type of experience. But yeah, just be warned, it is difficult, it doesn't hold your hand, there's lots of nice tutorials and stuff, it's not too annoying at the beginning. I did find that a little bit annoying to begin with, where it felt a little bit like kind of like a mobile game with all of its introductions and stuff. But once you get past that, it's, it's okay. But it's just very difficult, and it will take a long time to master. So if you want to have a game to sink a lot of time into, then this is a perfect one for you, especially if you love looter-based combat. And I'm just trying to be fair, because honestly, this game is great, and I don't think there's many negatives at all. But, if I have to nitpick, okay, I will say that sometimes it's a little bit disappointing that the world doesn't truly immerse you. At least it didn't for me. I'm not as invested in this universe as other fantasy games, and I think it just does a poor job of, kind of trying to immerse the player, and that's very important in games. It's atmosphere and immersion in that actual universe, especially in RPG. But this is an action-focused RPG experience, so I understand it's not everyone's interest. If you really want to get into the story, there is lore that you can delve into, but it's not really told to you. There's no, gripping story, at least for me, from what I've seen so far. None of the characters, are really interesting, unique people or anything like that. So, and sometimes they're not even voice acted. So yeah, just be aware that that type of experience is not here in Path of Exile. And sometimes there's so many systems going on at once, it doesn't ever make me feel like, oh, I'm getting lost in this universe. I'm still playing a game. That's just a personal bias, so bear that in mind. But I love games that really draw me into their world, that don't have, convoluted systems constantly showing up to kind of take away my immersion. Like I said, when you get the hang of it, it all flows, and it's really fun, but as an immersive experience, maybe it's not going to be for everyone, okay? And the point I wanted to make at the beginning of the video is basically don't freak out, okay? If you've seen headlines saying, this game is going to cost you $480, which sounds absolutely insane, don't worry. Early access, you can play with a simple, $30 amount, which is actually quite cheap for a AAA game like this. So I just want to reassure people who have maybe seen big headlines and all that stuff not to freak out. So in conclusion, Path of Exile 2, I think this is such an interesting RPG. It's very much for a dedicated audience, and very much focused for Path of Exile and a specific demographic, okay? It's not going to be for everyone, but I don't think every game needs to be for everyone. I think this is what we need to see more of in gaming. It's probably the best, for this genre, in my opinion. Certainly a big competitor to other games like Diablo and stuff like that. And if you love, this type of intense combat with a lot of things going on at once, if you love loot, if you love fighting bosses, you love dark fantasy and managing all these systems, a massive, progression tree to upgrade and try out different playstyles for your character, Path of Exile 2 has all of that in huge amounts. And honestly, just like the amount of variation when it comes to enemies, the worlds, the different locations that you go to, maybe not in the way that you traverse them, but just in the locations and the atmosphere, that it does change, and it's going to be crazy with the endgame stuff. So that is my Path of Exile 2 review. Do I recommend it? I would say yes, okay? Yes, if you are a fan of this type of RPG. If you've never played this type of RPG before, perhaps try something else before going straight into it. But I do think this is a high quality game. That's my honest review of Path of Exile 2. the early access Path of Exile 2 review. It's taken a long ass time, so I do hope you like the video, you subscribe if you're new, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Have yourselves a great day. Thanks for joining the Wise One community. Peace out.